Taking a course on dystopian literature has had me thinking a lot about where I see utopian dreams and dystopian nightmares manifest in the systems around me. When discussing the utopian dreams inherent to our modern paradigm, I can't help but think about what I consider to be the most powerful utopian ideology dictating our world today. I'm referring to global capitalism and money culture, and the dystopian nightmare it necessitates, that is, the commodification and devaluing of life and enforcement of violent hierarchies. Growing up in our modernized, globalized world, we're steeped in the philosophies of zealous consumerism. We're taught that creation of wealth is a public good, that so long as the green arrow indicates a rise in the Dow or NASDAQ and our GDP is growing year after year, everything is well and good, and getting better for all of us. But what does this really mean in a country where 99% of the new wealth created falls directly into the laps of a few members of a wealthy superclass? If we are to, dare I say it, acknowledge that our world itself is a finite resource, isn't the capitalist dream of eternal growth fundamentally unsound? This fervent embrace of the capitalist utopian narrative is sold to society as a path to freedom, liberty, and the right to be an individual. We are the total masters of our own futures, capitalism teaches us, and our successes and failures are the product of us alone. Empowering, right? We're supposedly free to make of our lives what we will, with plenty of opportunities to succeed should we show personal merit. Now that honestly sounds fairly good to me, so long as there is a strong safety net in place to provide basic human necessities to all people. Unfortunately, that is not the world of our modern capitalist utopia. Freedom is not the majority of our country working towards the enrichment of a minuscule superclass while having next to nothing in the way of personal security. Freedom is not the 80 richest people in the world possessing more of the world's wealth than the poorest 3.6 billion. Freedom doesn't look like 15.8 million children in our country alone experiencing food insecurity while we literally let food on the shelves rot because we would rather waste it than give it away for nothing. Freedom is not exploiting the earth and making our only home more and more inhospitable simply for short-term monetary gains for the few. Well, I take part of that back. Maybe all of those things are a type of freedom, of liberty. If we mean obscene freedom of the super wealthy to take, use, dominate, and consume as they may at the expense of the liberties and livelihoods of everyone else. For me at least, that's not the kind of freedom I want. Let's take a step back though, and question whether even the wealthy superclass are wholly liberated by the cannibalistic capitalist utopia. Just as the impoverished worker is dehumanized and reduced to a mere tool dedicated to creating riches for someone far removed from himself, so too can the richest CEO become slave to the construct of money. There is no reason for the richest in our society to keep making money except for simply the sake of doing so. Another $50 million squeezed out of suffering in the third world will have absolutely no effect on the lifestyle, opportunities, or future of a multi-billionaire, and yet it still feels crucial to him to add it to his war chest? The billionaire is as much a slave to the construct of money as the working class. This is the dystopian nightmare inherent to wholehearted acceptance of capitalist utopianism. Money becomes the ultimate good, valuable beyond its utility to the people who create and use it. Money is more important than life. The ultimate gauge of your value and personhood is how much wealth you create, what you own, what you consume. I don't want to live in a world where that's true. But the most ridiculous part of all of this to me is that even if we for some odd reason are content with accepting money and economic growth as our culture's ultimate universal good, the capitalist utopian wonderland of our world still seems absurd. Money culture is ravenous, its thirst unquenchable, but it also lacks the most basic of self-preservation instincts. Indeed, if the capitalist utopian dream cared about its own long-term perpetuation, wouldn't it at least to some extent acknowledge that it is tied to a finite planet? I refuse to believe that the overhaul of infrastructure necessary to convert our energy economy over to green sources would cost more than hundreds of years, plagued by mass inundation of previously habitable land, increased natural disasters, and overwhelming ecological crises that are consequences of a rapidly changing climate. Creating wealth is rooted at its core to production, and production of goods is quite obviously dependent on the resources of our planet. The dystopian nightmare that accompanies capitalist utopianism is as suicidal as it is violent. Why do we accept this paradigm as reality when it is so blatantly counter to the best interests of basically everyone? I guess never having experienced a world not utterly entranced by the dream of global capitalism, it's hard to imagine that things could ever be any other way. People will argue that greed for power and wealth is simply a symptom of our human nature. That may be true, and I personally doubt that a wholly egalitarian culture could ever be achieved. But that doesn't disempower us from taking steps towards a world that is far more pluralistic and less obscenely unequal. There can be no singular utopian vision for the world that will not violate someone else's existence and vision. For example, some within my own field of ecology would argue that we should always act in the best interest of the planet, as the environment is both beautiful in and of itself and fundamental to the success of humanity. Well, if ecological balance becomes our ultimate good, and human overpopulation is a serious ecological crisis, doesn't that make plagues, famines, and wars good in that they keep the population in check? As much as I respect and value our natural world, I can't endorse the idea that these disasters should be viewed positively. My point is, every philosophy can be made violent when embraced too singularly, but the utopianism of global capitalism is particularly pressing, as it has been realized on such a massive scale. Understanding the violent dystopia thinly veiled behind the enticing exterior of global capitalism, how then do we enact change to a system with such vast momentum? All-out rebellion, a complete, all-out deconstruction of our current system would likely be as violent and horrendous as the system itself. Steady, incremental change might not be nearly as satisfying as something abrupt, but I can't advocate for burning it all to the ground. I believe that we need to reclaim our agency within the democratic process, or else watch our world be served to the super wealthy on a silver platter. If we won't exercise our right to vote out the scumbag politicians that turn a blind eye to billionaire tax evasion, exploitation of labor, and destruction of the planet, why would Exxon and Halliburton ever stop bankrolling our government? I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for the CEOs and politicians to see their own wrongdoing, because the vast majority never will. If you don't like Goldman Sachs owning your representatives, don't be one of the 63.6% of eligible voters or 78.7% of young people who didn't vote last election. Know the issues and exercise your right to be heard. It's time we stop enabling the true entitlement class. Let's start saying no to the billionaires who would buy, rig, and abuse our country and world for the glorification of obscene wealth. There may be no perfect world ahead, but I sure as hell know that the world of unbridled global capitalism could not be further from one I'd like to live in.